I remember that night like it was yesterday, even though I've tried to shove it into some corner of my mind where I won't have to feel it again. I was hauling a load through a stretch of road that clings to the sides of the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of pass where the road narrows to a single lane in places, and the cliffs drop off so sharp you can see forever, or maybe nothing at all depending on the fog. I had been driving for hours, the hum of the diesel engine and the occasional call over the CB radio keeping me company. The night had been quiet, eerily so, and I was looking forward to the comfort of a motel a few towns over. But as I rounded a bend, a wall of fog rolled in, thicker than anything I'd seen, a gray that swallowed everything in an instant. 1 second I could see the faint yellow lines curling through the black asphalt. The next, they were gone, and all I had was that thick, suffocating gray. I slowed, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, trying to tell myself it was just fog, that this was normal in these mountains and I'd get through it. But the headlights started bouncing off things I couldn't make sense of. Shapes rising up from the roadside, tree trunks taller and darker than they should have been, shadows that didn't match any tree or rock. My heart started hammering, a rhythm I couldn't control, and I realized the quiet of the night was broken by a sound I couldn't place at first, a whisper soft, almost too faint to hear. I froze, thinking it was my imagination, the wind through the cab, or maybe the rig settling on the road. But then it came again, and it was closer this time, echoing around me inside the cab. I couldn't tell if it was a voice, a name, or just the sound of someone breathing. The road behind me, I realized, was no longer empty. I could hear a rumble, the low growl of a semi's engine somewhere back there. But no headlights appeared in the mirrors, no sign of another trucker making his way through the fog. Every turn I took, the whispers followed, like the fog itself was alive, like it had picked me out for something. I tried to focus on the road to ignore the rising panic, but my eyes kept catching glimpses of shapes moving just at the edge of the headlights, never fully revealed, just enough to make my skin crawl. Something was riding with me, I could feel it, always at the periphery, silent but present, like a shadow that had learned to mimic my own movements. I tried to pass it, hoping the curves would lose it, that the fog would break, but it thickened, congealed into a wall that forced me to stop. I remember pulling off the road onto a small pullout, hoping that stationary, I could make sense of what was happening. The air dropped suddenly, colder than it should have been for a summer night, and I could see my breath fog in front of me, curling and twisting in a way that made the cab feel like a cage. Then I saw it, or thought I did, reflecting in the headlights, eyes bright and unnervingly still, staring back at me from the darkness beyond the fog. I slammed my eyes shut, thinking if I didn't look it couldn't see me. When I opened them again it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there in the way I imagined, but the dread, the feeling of being watched, stayed with me, settling deep in my chest. I tried to restart the truck, hands shaking, fumbling with the gear and the ignition, praying the engine would respond. When it finally roared back to life, I edged forward slowly, like any sudden movement would draw attention. The whispers followed at first, but eventually faded, swallowed again by the gray haze. I dared not look in the mirrors, not wanting to see the impossible, not wanting to confirm that what I had felt was real. I drove on, each mile an eternity, the fog like a living thing pressing against the tires, crawling over the asphalt, hiding the world from me. By the time the sun started to bleed over the ridges, spilling light that cut through the gray, the road finally cleared. Trees and rocks returned to their natural shapes, the impossible shadows gone. I dared a glance in the mirrors, expecting, hoping not to see anything, and there was nothing. No semi, no eyes, no figure. Just the road I had come from, empty and indifferent. But the whispers never truly left me. In the weeks that followed, in the silence of a motel room or the hum of the engine on another night run, I would hear them, faint, at the edge of hearing, a reminder that whatever had followed me that night had not entirely gone. I tell myself it was fog, imagination, the exhaustion of long hours behind the wheel. But sometimes, when I'm driving through a pass and the mist starts to roll in, I remember the eyes, the whispers, and I know there are corners of these mountains where the fog doesn't just obscure. It watches, waits, and moves with you. I don't know what it was. I don't know if anyone else has felt it, or if the mountains themselves conspire to test those who travel them alone. All I know is that night changed me. I drive slower now, wary of the fog, listening for sounds that shouldn't exist, knowing that out there, in the folds of the Appalachian passes, Some things ride with you long after you think you've left them behind. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it, faint but persistent, that whisper that shouldn't belong to any living thing, and I remember that night as if it were happening again, right there in the cab under the weight of fog that swallowed the road. I had been driving a long stretch of the Appalachian highway that night, the kind of road where the mountains press in from both sides, and the only light comes from your headlights bouncing off wet asphalt. It had started to rain unexpectedly, a heavy summer shower that seemed to come out of nowhere, pounding against the cab and streaking my windshield faster than my wipers could keep up. I was tired, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from hours on the road with nothing to break up the monotony except the hum of the engine and the occasional trucker's chatter over the CB. That's when I saw her, standing by the side of the road at mile marker 13. At first, I thought she was a stranded motorist, though the coat she wore looked out of place, old-fashioned almost, soaked through and hanging on her like a shroud. Her hair was plastered across her face, hiding most of it, and when she raised her thumb for a ride, I felt a little jolt of unease. Something about her presence didn't fit with the reality of the highway, like she had been placed there for me to see, but wasn't quite a part of the world around me. Still, common sense won out over fear. I slowed, pulled off to the shoulder, and unlocked the passenger door. She slid in without a word, water dripping onto the floor mat, the cab immediately feeling colder than it should have been for a humid summer night. I started driving again, trying to make small talk, asking if she needed to get anywhere, but there was no response. Her head stayed low, hair stuck to her skin, and when I glanced at the rearview mirror, I realized I couldn't see her face, only the back of her head. The cab seemed to shrink, the usual comforting hum of the engine replaced by a tight silence that pressed in from all sides. I laughed nervously to myself, telling myself I was tired, imagining things, but then she lifted her head slightly, and her eyes met mine. Hollow, empty, impossible. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. I jerked the wheel slightly, my heart hammering, but she didn't move. She just stared, unblinking, silent. The highway stretched before us, a ribbon of wet asphalt disappearing into darkness. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the road, but I kept catching glimpses of her in the corner of my eye. It wasn't just that she didn't speak, it was that she seemed to be observing. Not in the casual way someone in a vehicle beside you does, but in a way that made me feel exposed, as if she could see through me, every thought, every exhaustion, every secret I had carried alone on these roads. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, gripping the worn leather until my knuckles went white, and drove on, hoping the next exit would free me from this presence. When the signs for the exit finally appeared, my relief was immediate but shallow. I looked again at her, and in that instant she was gone. The seat beside me was empty. The only evidence that she had ever been there was the wet footprints on the floor mat, slowly drying in the heat of the engine. I slammed on the brakes, almost hitting the guardrail, my stomach twisting in disbelief. I spun the truck around, scanning the highway, but there was no sign of her anywhere. No figure on the shoulder, no reflections in the wet pavement, nothing. Just the empty highway, the rain still falling, and the echo of the cold presence that had occupied my cab for those minutes that now felt like hours. I pulled over at the next rest stop, shaking so badly I could barely reach for my phone. I checked the cameras on the highway the next day. Nothing. Mile marker 13 was deserted. No record of anyone ever standing there that night. Nothing at all. It didn't make sense, but the memory of her, the wet coat, and those impossible eyes never left me. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, exhaustion, the isolation of the mountains. But the unease in my chest told me it was something else, something that didn't follow the rules of the roads or the world I knew. Since that night I avoid that stretch when I can. I find myself watching the shoulders, scanning the rain-soaked roads, half expecting to see her again, half hoping I won't. Every time I drive alone through the mountains, I can't shake the memory of her silent presence, the way she seemed to occupy the cab, and the way her gaze pinned me down in a way no living person ever could. Even now, I hear the soft slap of wet shoes against metal in my mind, and I remember that mile marker 13 isn't just a number. It's a place where the road ends and something else begins, something I'll never fully understand, but will never forget. I'd been driving through the Appalachian Mountains late that night, the kind of stretch where the trees lean close to the road and the air is so thick it feels like it's pressing against the cab. I'd been on the road for hours, hauling a load that seemed heavier with each mile, the rhythmic hum of the diesel engine my only company. The mountains were quiet, almost unnaturally so, the usual distant sounds of wildlife replaced by an oppressive stillness that settled into my bones. It was the kind of night where your mind starts playing tricks on you, shadows twisting just a little too sharply, the smell of wet leaves somehow more pungent than normal. I had the CB radio on, mostly out of habit, flipping through channels, listening to distant chatter of other drivers. Then, out of nowhere, the static started. At first, it was just the crackle you expect from a channel with no signal, the hiss of electricity through the air. But then it changed, a subtle undertone that made the hairs on my neck prickle. Faint whispers at first, almost like someone murmuring prayers in the dark. I leaned forward, squinting at the radio, thinking maybe it was someone talking on a nearby frequency. And then I heard it. My name said clearly, softly, but with an edge that made my stomach twist. Chris. It breathed, and I froze, the wheel heavy in my hands. My name isn't common, and no one should have known I was even on this road at this time. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was just another trucker messing with the mic. But the voice, it wasn't just my name, it knew things. Places I'd been earlier in the day, people I'd seen, secrets I hadn't spoken to a single soul. I switched channels, hoping it was just a freak of the static, maybe interference, but it followed me. Every channel carried the same voice, always closer, always mocking in a way that made me tense every muscle. I reached to turn the radio off, twisted the knob, flipped the power switch, but the static returned seconds later, louder this time, a whispery echo that felt like it was right behind my seat. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was tired, that the isolation of the mountains was getting to me, that long hours and dim headlights were conjuring this from my mind. But every mile made it worse. The roads were narrow, winding through dense forest, and the darkness outside seemed to lean toward me, pressing against the glass and metal of the cab. The voice didn't just speak, it followed the cadence of the road, almost breathing in rhythm with my tires over the wet asphalt. I tried rolling down the windows, letting the night air in, but it didn't change a thing. The whispers were inside my head now, inside the truck, impossible to escape. I pulled over at the next rest area, heart hammering, hoping that leaving the road and shutting everything off would stop it. I killed the engine, ripped the radio out of the dash, just the bare wires and static left behind, and for a moment the silence was complete. My chest eased a little, and I thought I was free. Then, faintly, from the wires dangling in the cab, the whisper returned. "You can't leave," it said, and it was closer, almost tangible, a cold breath against the back of my neck. I dropped the wires, nearly fell out of the seat, and didn't move until the sound faded, swallowed by the hum of the night. By dawn, I was on the road again, leaving the mountains behind, hoping the light would clear what had happened. The radio was quiet, dead, just static on all channels, but the memory of that voice stayed with me, embedded deep, the way a scar never really disappears. Even now, months later, I hesitate before turning the CB on at night. Even in my own cab, with other drivers around, I can't shake the thought that it could come back, that somewhere out there, through wires and waves, that voice is waiting, knowing things no one else should, calling me back into that narrow, winding highway through the dark Appalachian forest. I was driving through a lonely stretch of Appalachian highway, one of those roads where the trees lean in close and the mountains press against you from every side, when I first noticed it, the trailer sagging. At first, I thought it was a matter of weight shifting, the load settling unevenly, but I knew my cargo. I'd checked the straps before leaving, made sure every crate and pallet was secure. Nothing should have been off. Yet the trailer drooped lower than it ever had before, the tires seeming to sink into the asphalt, and the suspension groaned under a weight that wasn't there, or at least shouldn't have been. My stomach knotted, a creeping sense of wrongness crawling up my spine, the kind of instinct that truckers learn to trust, the one that tells you when something's not just broken, but broken in a way you can't fix with wrenches or straps. I pulled over at a wide spot in the shoulder, the engine ticking as it cooled, and climbed down to check the trailer. Everything looked normal. Pallet secure, straps tight, nothing that should have caused it to sag so. But the feeling persisted, a pressure I couldn't shake, like the trailer had taken on a life of its own, leaning against me, pressing into me even though it sat still. I climbed back into the cab, hands trembling on the wheel, and started driving again, hoping it was just fatigue playing tricks on my senses. That's when the noises began. It started subtle, scraping like a crate shifting, but not enough to make sense. Then came soft thuds, the kind that could be anything. A loose board, an animal trapped inside, but every time I checked, there was nothing. I pulled off again, cracked the rear doors, heart hammering, expecting maybe a raccoon or stray dog, something that could account for the sound. The trailer was empty. Just crates stacked neatly, untouched. I felt a chill run through me as I shut the doors, hearing that rhythm again, soft and deliberate, almost like breathing. It moved with me. When I started driving, the trailer seemed heavier, the tires groaning under some invisible load. When I braked, the pressure eased slightly, but the sense of presence remained, something shifting with every turn, moving when I moved, impossible to ignore. The highway stretched on, dark and deserted, the mountains looming like silent watchers. The night wind pressed against the cab, carrying the smell of wet leaves and cold earth, and the trailer followed me like a shadow. Each mile dragged, each turn heavier than it should have been. I could feel it in my shoulders, in my arms gripping the wheel, in the pit of my stomach, a presence riding with me, something I couldn't see but could feel, something that knew the rhythm of my breathing and the way I held the wheel. I tried to rationalize it, blaming fatigue, the isolation, the quiet night, but deep down I knew it was wrong in a way that couldn't be explained. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost its meaning on that stretch of road. I kept the engine running, eyes on the dark asphalt, listening to the sounds that followed from the trailer. Scraping, soft thumps, a subtle shifting that synchronized with every bump, every jolt. I tried talking out loud, telling myself to snap out of it, but the words sounded hollow, swallowed by the night. I pulled into a rest area as soon as one appeared, parked in a corner, and left the trailer. I didn't check it, didn't look back. I just climbed into the cab and drove on alone, the empty road stretching before me, and the trailer left behind, waiting, whatever it was inside it moving in rhythm with the night. I never went back for it. I never saw it again, but the memory of that night haunts me. I can still feel the weight, pressing down on my chest, a subtle but undeniable reminder that not everything that rides with you is visible. Even now, years later, whenever I haul a load alone on a dark Appalachian stretch, I glance in the mirrors, listen for sounds that shouldn't be there, and I remember the trailer that carried more than it should, a presence that rode with me and left me questioning what is real and what isn't. That night taught me to respect the quiet, to trust my instincts, and to understand that on some roads, the weight you feel isn't always the cargo you can see. I had been driving through the Appalachian Mountains for most of the day, the kind of stretch where the peaks press against the sky and the valleys drop so sharply you can see forever if the fog isn't hanging low. My load was late, and the shortcut through a small tunnel seemed faster than winding around the mountains, a narrow opening cut into rock that I'd passed a few times before. It was supposed to be a simple passage, maybe 30-40 seconds at most, just a quick slice through the ridge to save me an hour of back roads. But that night, the tunnel had other plans. As I turned the rig into the mouth of it, I noticed immediately that the light at the other end seemed wrong. It was there, faint and distant, but impossibly far. My headlights reflected off the damp stone, revealing walls slick with condensation, and the cab felt suddenly small, almost suffocating, the rock pressing in on all sides. My GPS blinked and froze, the signal lost inside the mountain. The radio died, static hissing through the speakers, then gone entirely. Even the mirrors offered no reflection of the tunnel behind me, just pitch black, as if the entrance had never existed. I told myself it was just an odd stretch of rock, just some quirk of design, but the unease settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, it's hard to say. Time lost meaning in that dark, enclosed space. Every sound echoed too sharply, my own breathing bouncing back to me from the walls. And then I heard it. Whispers, faint at first, unintelligible, almost as if the tunnel itself was trying to speak. I tensed, listening, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was the wind, maybe water dripping from the stone, but the whispers grew, subtle scratches and taps following my tires. Something was moving with me. I could feel it, a presence riding along, keeping pace with the cab in a way that made my stomach twist. Every time I glanced to my side, I thought I caught a shadow, fleeting and impossible to identify, a shape that moved in rhythm with my steering. I slowed, thinking that perhaps the rig was too fast, that if I took my time, I could pass this strange anomaly. But the tunnel didn't relent. The walls seemed closer now, the cab smaller, air thick with a damp metallic smell that had not been there before. The whispers came in short bursts now, almost like breathing, and I swear I heard my own name, though I tried to convince myself it wasn't possible. My pulse raced, hands gripping the wheel so tightly I could feel the tendons in my wrist strain, and the rig felt heavier with each foot I drove. I tried the CB, hoping to reach someone, anyone, but there was nothing. Just static that morphed into faint, mocking tones I couldn't quite identify. I considered stopping, even backing out, but the road behind me seemed to vanish into the black, the entrance swallowed by the same darkness that pressed from all sides. Panic crept in, but I forced myself to keep moving, to put 1 mile after the other, telling myself I would reach the end, that the light must be real, that the tunnel would eventually open. When I finally saw daylight, it was blinding, a sudden, overwhelming wash of sun after the oppressive darkness. I expected a short stretch of road, maybe an exit sign, something familiar. But the landscape that greeted me was not the same as the map. The mountains looked taller, the valleys deeper, the roads twisting in ways that made no sense. There was no sign of another vehicle, no evidence that the tunnel had been recently used by anyone else. For a moment, I wondered if I had driven in circles inside the mountain, trapped in some impossible loop, the world reshaped while I was gone. The air outside was cool, fresh, the kind of mountain morning that should have eased my nerves, but I felt hollowed, drained, as if the tunnel had taken something from me I wouldn't get back. The memory of the whispers lingered, faint but insistent, like a pulse in my ears. I drove on, wary of every bend, every shadow, every noise. The road behind me, as far as I could tell, was empty, normal, but I could still feel the weight of whatever had accompanied me inside that stone passage. It was gone, yet not gone. Even now, I hesitate when I approach tunnels in the Appalachians, especially the old, narrow ones cut into the ridges. I remember the suffocating air, the impossible distance to the exit, the whispers that rode with me as I drove, and the way the landscape seemed altered when I emerged. I don't know if the tunnel was a trick of the mountains, a crack in the earth that bends reality, or something more sentient, waiting in the darkness for anyone foolish enough to pass through. All I know is that I will never forget that night, and that every time I drive through those mountains, I glance at the dark openings in the ridges with a mix of dread and hesitation, knowing that the mountain can claim you in ways you never see coming. I had been driving for hours through the winding roads of the Appalachians, the kind of night where everything outside feels vast, empty, and a little too quiet. The cab of the truck hummed steadily beneath me, tires tracing the curves of wet asphalt slick from a recent rain. I was tired, more than I wanted to admit, and when I saw the truck stop up ahead, glowing under its neon lights like a beacon in the dark, I felt relief wash over me. The lot was mostly empty, but the place looked alive. Lights flickering behind the windows, a faint silhouette moving behind the diner's counter, the smell of cooking food rolling through the air, almost strong enough to make my stomach growl. I parked and climbed down, stretching my legs, the gravel crunching under my boots. The door swung open with a familiar creak, and I stepped inside, expecting the warmth and bustle of late-night truckers grabbing coffee or burgers. Instead, I found nothing. Empty tables, chairs shifted as if someone had just vacated them, the shelves lined with cans and snacks, some rolling slowly along the edges, the soft sound of tin against tin echoing across the room. The smell of food lingered, rich and tempting, but there was no one to serve it. No cook, no cashier, no other truckers. My voice sounded hollow when I called out, "Hello?" There was no response, only the echo of my own words bouncing back at me, distorted in the high, stale ceiling of the diner. I checked my phone, hoping to call someone, anyone, for help, only to find it dead. No signal, no charge, no explanation. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, and I could swear I felt the air grow heavier, oppressive, as if it had weight and intention. A sense of being watched crawled up my spine, subtle at first, then undeniable. I turned slowly, scanning every corner, expecting someone to step out from the kitchen or behind the counter, but there was nothing. No shadows moved. No doors opened. And yet, the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of my mind, a presence that existed without form. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers along the shelves. The cans rolled silently, chairs shifted slightly, as if unseen hands were testing the laws of physics just to remind me they were there. I told myself it was exhaustion, that the mind plays tricks when you're alone on these roads at night. I told myself I would laugh at this in the morning. But the sounds grew more distinct. Soft taps, whispers too faint to understand, breaths that didn't belong to me. I kept moving, step by careful step, unwilling to turn my back, unwilling to stop. Every instinct I had screamed to leave, to get back to the truck and never return, but curiosity rooted me to the spot, and fear rooted me even further. Hours, or maybe minutes, I can't be sure, passed in that space. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, their hum a constant companion. The smells of cooking food came and went, rich and mouth-watering one moment, faint and acrid the next. I tried calling out again, my voice cracking, but no one answered. No one ever came. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the presence seemed to recede. The air lightened, the cans settled into place, chairs stopped moving, and the diner returned to some semblance of normality. I ran outside to the truck, heart still hammering, and looked back through the windows. The place was quiet, deserted in a way that suggested nothing unusual had ever happened, like I had imagined it all. But I know I didn't. I could still feel the weight of that place pressing in on me, the memory of being watched, of sounds without sources, of an environment that had breathed and moved as if it were alive. Driving away, the mountains stretched before me, empty and indifferent, but I couldn't shake the image of the truck stop. Even now, when I pass small diners on isolated stretches of road, I hesitate, scanning the windows for movement that isn't there, smelling the ghost of food that should be gone, listening for a sound that isn't real. The night doesn't forget, and neither do I. I was driving late that night, following an old map I'd found in the glove compartment of the truck, a faded thing that promised a shortcut through the mountains. The highway had been long and empty, the hum of the tires on the wet asphalt a steady companion, and I'd grown tired of the winding curves and the isolation. The map seemed like a good idea, a line cutting across the hills where the GPS insisted there was no road. I took the turn without hesitation at first, expecting a simple path that would shave miles off my route, but almost immediately something felt off. The asphalt began to fade beneath my tires, first into cracked patches, then gravel, and finally into dirt and weeds overtaking the road. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches scraping the cab like skeletal fingers. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the night seemed to grow thicker with every mile. The GPS, predictably, lost signal entirely, leaving me with nothing but the faint glow of my dashboard and the narrow slice of road ahead. I told myself it would loop back, that the mountains always had another road, another path out, but the further I drove, the more impossible it became to believe. I could hear movement in the trees beside me. Not the usual rustle of nocturnal animals, not the sound of wind through the leaves, but deliberate, paced, as if someone or something was keeping step with me. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the long hours, the isolation playing tricks. But then I heard it clearly. My name, whispered softly, so faint I could barely trust my ears. I glanced into the mirrors, into the darkness behind me, and saw only shadows, trees, and the occasional glint of something moving just out of reach of my headlights. The road twisted and turned in ways that made no sense, curling back on itself, looping impossibly through the hills. Each mile felt longer than the last, each turn heavier, and the presence in the trees kept pace with me, relentless. I tried to turn back at one point, but the path I had come from seemed to have vanished, swallowed by darkness and overgrowth. I gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white, heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed to stop, to abandon the vehicle and find high ground, but the way the road twisted, the impossibility of the path ahead, it felt like some force had me trapped, moving me deeper into the forest. I could feel it then more than hear it. Eyes watching from the darkness, something pacing alongside me, breathing when I breathed, shifting when I shifted. The sense of being hunted settled deep in my bones, cold and unshakable. Hours, or maybe minutes, it's hard to say, passed with no end in sight. The night pressed in, black and thick, and I could barely see the cab mirrors, barely see the road through the weeds and shadows. I whispered to myself, trying to calm the panic, to remind myself it was just a road, just isolation, just fatigue. But the whispers continued, always at the edge of hearing, sometimes calling my name, sometimes indistinguishable, like the forest itself had learned to mimic voices. The air was damp, heavy, and carried a smell that was not quite earth, not quite rot, but something that made my stomach twist. I drove on, heart hammering, knowing I could not stop, knowing that stopping might be worse. Just as the night seemed endless, pale light began to break over the ridges, the first hint of dawn slipping through the dense trees. The road gradually widened, the asphalt returning, and signs of civilization. Mailboxes, fences, a lone farmhouse, appeared in the distance. I drove on cautiously, not trusting the normalcy, my eyes darting to the tree line, expecting to see those shadows, those impossible movements. But the forest behind me was empty, still, indifferent, as if the night had never existed at all. The feeling of being hunted, though, did not leave me. Even as I rejoined the familiar highway, the sun rising behind the mountains, I could still feel the eyes in the darkness, pacing with me, watching. I tell myself it was a trick of the night, of the isolation, of the fatigue and old maps. Maybe it was just a back road that curved impossibly, that seemed longer and darker than it should have. But I know what I felt, know what I heard. And I can't drive those hills at night again without glancing into the forest, without imagining the road disappearing into impossible darkness, without hearing the whispers of something that knows my name, that follows me still, just beyond the reach of the headlights.